Right now, jury selection is underway for a federal trial dealing with an alleged staged car crash scheme.
It involves prominent New Orleans injury attorneys. Gabby Kellett is live at federal court.
Well, Meg, John, earlier this afternoon, U.S. District Judge Wendy Vitter asked any of the dozens of people who came out to jury duty today whether they knew anyone that she named who could testify at this trial against injury attorneys Jason Giles of the King firm and Vanessa Mata. Now, that included asking potential jury members if they knew Cornelius Garrison, a witness in the case who was killed. That happened as an FBI investigation mounted against a slew of injury attorneys and others accused of their involvement in staging vehicle crashes to win big settlements. Now, earlier this month, Judge Vitter said she'd allowed testimony submitted from Garrison before his death at trial with some stipulations. Now, those being tried for in the alleged murder scheme, Kenner attorney Sean L. Fordish, an alleged slammer in the case, Leon Parker, will not go on trial until later this year. Another alleged slammer, Ryan Harris, already pleaded guilty in connection with Garrison's death. Now, in court this week, we can expect the beginning of a lengthy trial against Mata and Giles. The government will aim to prove that the two paid people to slam into tractor trailers and other vehicles to prompt lawsuits and hefty settlements. Both Giles and Mata face fraud and obstruction of justice charges, and they are two of 63 people total charged in connection with the case, many of whom have already pleaded guilty. Now, latest from the courtroom, Judge Vitter asked potential jurors if they've read anything about the case or been told anything about the case, which has prompted attorneys to individually interview the dozens called in for jury duty today, one by one. Reporting live from federal court, Gabby Kellett, Fox 8, Local First.